Plasterboard sheets form the internal walls in the majority of homes and provide good heat and sound insulation as well as fire protection. They come in a variety of sizes, some conveniently sized to fit in the average family car. Plasterboard is essentially a solid sheet of hard plaster sandwiched between two paper sheets. This means that drywall walls can be constructed very quickly from a lightweight and versatile material which can be easily cut and shaped. Plasterboard has two distinct sides, and it's important that you only apply plaster to the light grey coloured side, as only this side is pre-primed for the plaster. When constructing a plasterboard wall, the darker coloured or brown side should go against the wall. To cut plasterboard, we transfer the measurement we have taken from the wall to the board. Using the measure and a pencil, we mark 3 times to ensure that our line will be square and level. We will use these marks to line up our ruler. We now take the ruler and position it carefully in line with the 3 marks we have just made, ensuring that our line is straight with all 3 markings. We then draw a guideline as a reference point for cutting. To cut the board, it's best to lay it on a flat, hard surface or floor that we're not worried about marking. Then, after lining up our ruler with the markings, we begin to score along the line a few times, using the ruler as a guide until we are a few millimetres into the surface of the plaster. To break the board, we lay it on its side with the cut side away from us, and using our knee and both our hands, carefully snap it along the cut and fold it back on itself to complete the break. We then take our knife and, using the fold line on the back as a guide, very carefully run the blade of the knife up the back of the sheet where we made the fold to complete the cut. Be extra careful with the knife as you get nearer the top of the board, as it's easy to slip and cut yourself. To fix plasterboard, we simply bring our correctly sized piece up to the stud partition and, holding it firmly against the wall, we begin to nail the board to the studs using our clout nails at approximately 12-inch intervals. Continue all round the edges of the board, nailing to the studs and noggins. More information on stud walls can be found in the handbook. Be careful not to damage the wall surface, but do ensure that the heads of the nails are slightly below the surface of the board. After we have boarded out the room, it is important that we apply a scrim tape to the joints between the boards. Scrim tape comes in rolls and is essentially a strong fibre mesh tape with a slightly sticky underside, which makes applying it to the wall fairly simple. The scrim tape allows the plaster to fill into the gaps and provides an additional support when the plaster dries, which prevents unsightly hairline cracks developing at the joints between plasterboards. To apply, hold the tape in position, pull slightly taut, and press the tape down to the wall, ensuring it makes a good contact. To cut the tape, use a knife. Don't worry about the tape looking neat, as it will be covered with plaster, but try to get an even amount of tape on each board and avoid creating any bunched or raised areas which might interfere with the plastering. It is important that your surface is thoroughly covered with PVA prior to you applying the plaster. Make sure that you give all the surfaces to be plastered a good coating and get the PVA right into any corners. If you're plastering over existing plaster, you'll need to pre-prime the surface to reduce the porousness and allow this to dry before adding a second coat immediately prior to plastering. Plasterboard does not require being pre-primed, as the degree of porousness is already ideal, but it does require a coat of PVA immediately before plastering to promote adhesion. The mix we use for virgin plasterboard is 3 parts water and 1 part PVA. You should not allow the PVA to fully dry before plastering. Ideally, the surface should be tacky when you apply the plaster. If the PVA does dry, simply give it another coat before plastering. If you're going over a large area, it's fine to use a roller, but don't neglect to get right into the corners and ensure a good soaking. As mentioned, if you're going over any surface other than plasterboard, you will also need to use PVA to seal the surface and let this dry. This is to prevent the surface drawing the water out of the plaster too soon before it's had a chance to go off properly. Don't be shy with PVA. It's far better to use too much than not enough. Fix flexing walls to avoid cracking. Most fine cracks in plaster are caused by the walls or ceilings flexing and are not the fault of the plastering job itself. Plasterboard can be delivered to site. Ask your local builder's yard, as delivery is usually offered as standard. Use a rasp file to tidy the edges of splintered boards. And see the handbook for more specific advice on stud walls and boarding out. To recap, to cut plasterboard, score one side and then fold. Fix plasterboard using galvanised clout nails. Tape the joints between plasterboard sheets to prevent cracking. And prime your walls using PVA before plastering. And plaster before the PVA dries. You are likely to encounter a variety of surfaces when plastering: new plasterboard, existing plaster, bare brick or stone walls, and various damaged surfaces. Each one of these surfaces presents you with a unique challenge, and you need to prepare for each surface in advance when tackling it. For example, when going over new plasterboard, a quick coat of PVA immediately prior to plastering is all that is required. When going over existing plaster, providing that plaster is sound, the plaster will first need to be sealed, and then an additional treatment of PVA will need to be added. In contrast, a bare brick or stone wall will usually require some kind of undercoat or browning coat before we can put on the surface plaster. Likewise, any kind of damaged surfaces usually need to be built up first using some kind of bonding coat. Further information on this is given in the accompanying handbook. However, regardless of the underlying surface, it is common practice nowadays to first overboard or board out with new plasterboard. More information on dealing with the other surfaces is given in the handbook. However, rest assured that the principles and techniques shown in this video are exactly the same regardless of the surface. Safety. Plasterboard is very heavy. Get help lifting it and consider wearing steel toe cap boots. Plasterboard walls are fire barriers. Check with the building regulations. Take care when cutting plasterboard. It's very easy to slip and cut yourself. PVA and plaster are not toxic substances, but protect your eyes and avoid ingestion whilst working with them.